Ladies and gentlemen, The Vow Eternal by Christy Golden. This is the new short story from World of Warcraft. Now, I do want to say, if you are interested in listening to this story, this is probably not the best way to listen to it, because I am known for interrupting myself and sort of speculating on things. But let's see. Wrathion's heart ached with grief and flamed with fury. Splotches of deep crimson soaked into the golden sands as those who bled slipped into timelessness. Everything was timeless here in the caverns, and it was what the caverns sheltered that the fallen dragons of Azeroth had died to defend. Wrathion, Earthwarder, aspect of the black dragonflight, turned sand to glass with the magma he breathed. His loyal flight, a dancing wave of gleaming ebony scales, followed him, weaving between the swirling pillars of sand to fight back against the tide of infinite darkness. Is this spoilers? Is this confirmation that Wrathion does become the Earthwarder? I mean, we'll have to keep reading, right? But all were as free as he was from the madness that had cursed the first aspect of Earth. Nalfarian, otherwise known as Deathwing, was gone forever. He lived solely as a distant memory, his only ability to harm in the recollection of his wicked deeds. Wrathion led the Black Dragonflight now, battling to protect Azeroth alongside the 4 other flights. Blue, green, red, and bronze. They were united in purpose at long last. Then it came, as it always did, the shadow falling upon them, upon him. No, I must not look up. But no sooner did he think it than he began to twist and shriek. Metal plating spread over him, containing him as he contorted into a form less of solid flesh than of liquid fire. When the horrifying transformation was complete, the monster he had become, fueled by hatred and rage, opened its massive iron jaws. There is no Wrathion. The thing of metal and magma cried. The voice was dreadful, heart-stopping, and familiar. There is only I, Deathwing, now and always. Wrathion found himself hissing, but it was not his mouth. He watched, helpless, as the aspect swooped to attack him. As the black dragons doubled back to blast him, their old enemy made anew. All they saw was Deathwing. All Wrathion saw were the blazing streams of dragonfire hurtling toward him. All he heard was his own voice bellowing, "You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow." Fire filling his vision, the heat, the brightness. "I'll never be you." Wrathion bolted upwards, his throat raw from the shout. It took him a long moment to realize he was not in the Timeways, under attack by his own kind. He was safe in a comfortable bed at the Summer's Rest Inn in Pandaria. He reoriented himself, taking slow, deep breaths, and focused on his surroundings. He noted the maps affixed to the walls, the chairs draped with crusty, mud-stained garb, the lacquered table obscured by empty bottles and sheaves of notes from his travels. Among the detritus sat a scroll, neatly rolled and stamped, with not one, but 2 wax seals. What the fuck does detritus mean? What the hell does this mean? Detritus. Gravel, sand, slit, or other material produced by erosion. Detritus. Oh my god. Okay. Why not just say waste? Like waste, bro. Anyway. Okay, so detritus sat a scroll neatly rolled and stamped with not one, but 2 wax seals. There was a soft knock on the door. Wrathion quickly composed himself, shrugging into an embroidered robe, then running his fingers through his thick shock of black hair. No doubt the Pandaran at the door had heard his nightmare-spurred shout, but he would be damned if he ever admitted to it. "Come in." His voice had its usual silky timbre. or timbre? I don't know. Mifan entered, bearing a tray heaped with local delicacies. They both pretended nothing at all, had happened as she cleared a place on the cluttered table and sat down the laden tray. The raw terror of the dream still lingered, but Wrathion's stomach growled as he surveyed the rice cakes, tea, and buns. Food was good, grounding even. May I bring you anything else? Something that is sort of wild to me. Wouldn't dragons prefer to eat raw meat? I mean, I'm assuming they should be able to eat human food, but for the most part, wouldn't they be far happier eating human meat? Or not human meat, but mortal meat. Just meat, animal meat. Caleb, I'm happy to hear that, bro. Of a Swiss... Jesus, Chase. Fucking hell, what does that word mean? Hold up, I need to check now. What the hell is that word? Long... Jesus, how do you... Sesquipedalian. Character with long words, long-winded. Alright, yeah, I agree with you. She is a bit of that. I think they find eating in humanoid for more efficient as caretakers of the world. They wouldn't go around hunting at Baron. No, but they would still hunt. They're dragons at the end of the day. They are creatures that would hunt. I would have thought. I might be wrong, but that's how I would have written it. May I bring you anything else? Wrathion forced a smile. No, that will be all, he said, and then added, actually, Mifan, might you bring by my lunch later? I think I shall stay in and be a lazy layabout for a change. He pretended not to notice Mifan's eyes darting to all the empty wine bottles. I am honored to serve such an esteemed guest. If you wish for anything else... Yes, ring the bell. I know, thank you. He waved his hand in a shooing gesture, and Mifan, not intimidated in the least, bowed and closed the door behind her. Wrathion let out a sigh, then selected a rice cake, pointedly ignoring the scroll's silent condemnation. As he ate, the remaining shreds of the recurring dream dispersed, but questions remained. Could he avoid following in Deathwing's dark footsteps? Shake the shadow? Or was it possible that Wrathion would one day succumb to that shadow? A dull ache in his chest pulled him from his uneasy thoughts. It was constant, this melancholy that had been plaguing him of late. So to the shadow thing, I mean, I don't know what Blizzard is going to do to explain how Wrathion is strong enough not to fall to the shadow. So Wrathion possesses much of the same traits as his father. Arrogance, over-reliance on himself, sort of a mistrust of anyone else, most of the time trying to do it himself or at least putting himself in very dangerous situations. And these exact traits is what the old gods used in order to subvert Deathwing. Now, you have to understand, the Black Dragonflight is internally tied to Azeroth. So the corruption that exists within Azeroth would also then be tied to the Black Dragonflight. Blizzard will have to do a really good job of explaining how Wrathion is strong enough to withstand the onslaught of the old gods. A dull ache in his chest pulled him from his uneasy thoughts. For years, Wrathion had been researching the mysterious place known as the Dragon Isles. It was no legend, though it very well might have been. The famous Wandering Isles of Pandaria had nothing on these isles when it came to elusiveness. Wrathion had sought intel to no avail. The things he had done, the places he had gone, the deals he had made. So much effort for so few answers. Most of the people he interrogated knew nothing, and many of those who did know something appeared to be disinclined to reveal more than a few bits and bobs of highly useless information. Vexing. Speaking of vexing, his gaze fell upon the scroll once more. It sat there, taunting him With a growl, he snatched it up and unfolded it. First Arcanist Thalyssra and Regent Lord Lor'themar Theron request the pleasure of your company as they join hearts, hands, and souls at the Lenastre estate. Formal attire requested. Wrathion scoffed. The pleasure of your company. Ha! This wedding was a monumental event in Azeroth history, the joining of two powerful leaders. And yet he knew he had been invited only as a courtesy. No one in Azeroth really wanted a black dragon, especially him, at any sort of grand occasion. It was good political theatre to trot out someone so instrumental in defeating the old god N'Zoth and saving the world. But neither the couple nor their high-profile guests would deem being in his company a pleasure. Wrathion crumpled the scroll with unnecessary vigor and flung it into the corner. Weddings were notoriously sappy affairs, and this one was likely to be especially so. According to the reports of his Black Talon operatives, it was a true love match, one that had blazed to a flame during a poetry competition. Of all things, there would be other giggling, happy pairs, families with their giddy children, old friends reuniting, positively stomach-churning. Wrathion arrived at the Lenastre estate with the wedding ceremony in full swing. He had hoped his attendance would provide him a reprieve from both his nagging nightmare thoughts and his fruitless search of the Dragon Isles, and also offer the chance for him to be seen. After all, he deserved to be there, showing face amongst the who's who of Azeroth, especially if he was going to become aspect of the Black Dragonflight one day. Presently, all eyes were on the wedding party. With his keen dragon eyes, Wrathion could see the lingering magic of the dome that once encased Suramar, its faint curve and the foul-ravaged area that it had stalwartly held at bay were testimony to all the Nightborn had endured. Wrathion turned his attention to Lady Liadrin, the fire-haired leader of the Blood Knights, who was officiating for Thalyssra and Lor'themar. The lovebirds standing before her were, Wrathion had to admit, gorgeous. Lor'themar was almost unrecognizable, for Wrathion had never seen him wearing anything other than armor and a stern expression. Knowing the history of his people, Wrathion could not blame him for either. Now, the leader of the Blood Elves was clad in colorful draped fabric and smiling gently, the warrior within yielding to the lover. While Lor'themar wore no giddy grin, still he was softer and seemed lit from within by a quiet joy. Thalyssra made no attempts to conceal her happiness, and her smile was full and free. Why wouldn't it be? Wrathion thought. The whole place was aglow with people from near and far. Standing with the bride were her advisors and former comrades in arms in the Nightfallen Rebellion. Wrathion spotted Arcanus Valtrois, Lilith Lunestra, and Silgrin and his owl, Cal. Theron's closest friend, Ranger General Haldoran Brightwing, beamed, while Grand Magister Romath wore robes and a rare smile. Among the attendees, the variety was even more evident. Thrall, former leader of the Horde and now member of the Horde Council, had brought his family, his wife, Accolonn, and their two children, Durak and Reze. Reze? Not entirely sure how to pronounce that. The youngsters were well-behaved, Wrathion supposed, though he knew very little about children. Well, nothing at all, really. He had no desire to start learning now. He took in Queen Talanji, who had made the trek from Zundalar, bringing along Zekon, another younger guest. Rokan, leader of the Dark Spirit Trolls, stood with them. There was High Chieftain Bane Bloodhoof, who Wrathion observed with a sly grin, came with Mela Highmountain. Lillian Voss had accompanied Kalia Menethil, erstwhile Princess of Lordaeron, and now part of the Forsaken Desolate Council. Beside her was her champion, Derek Proudmoore. In the past, Wrathion had sought to protect Azeroth by pitting Horde and Alliance against one another, in order to determine which side was the mightier. Now he understood that the fate of the world hung not on conquest, but on collaboration. Looking out over the captivated congregation, he was proud of the horde, of Lor'themar and Thalyssra, who had invited the Alliance, and he respected those of the Alliance who had accepted their invitation, from Lord Commander Turalyon, Regent of Stormwind and Protector of the Alliance, his partner Illyria, and their half-son Arator, to Matthias Shaw, who was no doubt keeping an eye on the leader of the Alliance at a horde wedding. The intrigue. Anduin, the King of Stormwind, who had been absent from that role over the past few years, had always believed permanent peace was possible between the two factions. He had worked toward that goal with a quiet tenacity, but Wrathion had admired. After the Fourth War, Anduin's hope had become a cautious reality, whereas Wrathion's hope had been twisted and thrust at him in the form of that dark dream. Lor'themar's voice cut through Wrathion's brooding. He was reciting his vows in poem form. My beloved Thalyssra, the gift of sorrow is the blessing of joy. The gift of the burden is its release. The gift of the storm is the clear sky. For this moment, I pledge to be at your side through both sorrow and joy. I pledge to share your burdens. I pledge to weather the storms with you and embrace with a full heart the brightness of the stars. Wrathion had not known a place so full of people could be so still. Thalyssra's tears stood like liquid crystal along the lavender of her cheeks as she spoke with a voice soft with emotion, but clear, her hands clasping her soon-to-be husband's hands. Lor'themar, my heart, the years ere now echo with regret. I had not understood till this moment. I did not know how I longed till you were there to assuage my longing. My world is painted with bursting color, the palette of dreams once hidden, now manifested. Let us craft with word and deed, with mind, body, and heart, this new existence where two are one, now and forever. And beyond forever, I shall love you. That's a little cheesy, but never mind. Wrathion should not have been surprised that their vows were in verse. It had sealed their love and would always be the language of their hearts. His own heart surged suddenly with that peculiar ache, and he rubbed his chest, hoping to massage it away. Before all gathered here, I, before the holy light itself, Lady Dihadran, said, I confirm with these words, Thalyssra and Lor'themar have entwined their lives, their fates, and their hearts. She grinned. May love and light ever shine upon you both. I don't know how I feel about the holy light being there, but, we'll pass on that one. Then Lor'themar lifted his face, and Thalyssra lowered hers. And as their lips met, and their arms went around each other, cheers, applause, and raucous whoops went up. Wrathion had wished to congratulate the newlyweds and take his leave, but they had not even finished descending the steps of the dais before guests clustered around them. He rolled his eyes. I shall wander about until the happy couple is less besieged. Once more his presence did not go without notice as he maneuvered through the crowd with his chest puffed out and chin held high, as was fitting for a future aspect. The glances of awe and admiration from onlookers pleased him, easing the ache in his chest and putting his old confidence back in his step. He had practically walked the span of Azeroth on a journey of self-discovery, studying the world and learning all he could about her people. Fought beside the world's greatest heroes, even against his own kind, to protect Azeroth. Surely he had done enough to prove he was not anything like Deathwing. Again, we come to what I said at the beginning. For Wrathion, his biggest problem is going to be the connection that the Black Empire or the Black Dragons have to Azeroth, and the corruption of Azeroth as a result of Old God Infestation. And for Wrathion, again, there's this constant arrogance within him that Usually in cases like this, you'll have these forces prey on your weaknesses. So arrogance in the Warhammer Fantasy, in the Warhammer 40k universe, for example, Fulgrim and his need for perfection at all times is what the Chaos Gods exploited in order to turn him towards chaos. And the same could be said for Wrathion here, and I can see how the old gods could do that. He surprised himself at the jollying sensation of being drawn into the atmosphere. By the time he reached a busy bar area, he was feeling more like himself. And there, not only could he enjoy a beverage, but also perhaps overhear interesting tidbits. Something told him this would be a fruitful endeavor. What was it the goblin said? Jackpot. As he waited for a much-desired glass of arc wine, he sidled up alongside Thalia Fordragon of Kultiris. She was speaking with the former blue dragon aspect Kalecgos, who was in his visage of a half-elf, with a hand on his chest as if in a pledge. Wrathion noted he looked a bit sad. The Lord Admiral is doing well, Thalia told Kalecgos. Lady Jaina wanted so much to be here, but her hands are rather full. We're having some trouble with pirates. Pirates? Again? Interrupted Flynn Fairwind, Thalia's friend. Nasty business. What flags are they flying? Might be old mates of mine. If so, I'll tell you all their tricks. Kalek offered Flynn a polite chuckle. He's not joking, asserted Matthias Shaw in a deadpan voice. Flynn smiled happily at him, and Shaw's lip twitched beneath his mustache. Was that a smile? Wrathion thought the old adage, opposites attract, was certainly true with this pair. Flynn was a reformed pirate, and Shaw led Stormwind's SI-7, a covert intelligence agency. Yet, here they were, a happy couple among other happy couples. Did no one else come along? Wrathion, Kalek said warmly. I'm glad you decided to attend. Not attending was never even a thought. Wrathion took his glass of arc wine and raised it celebratorily. It would be a shame to miss the chance to enjoy such fine arc wine and fine company. Thalia's eyes widened, and she took a step toward him. I am honored to meet you. I hear the world owes you a great thanks. Wrathion gave a benevolent nod. I serve Azeroth gladly. In any way I can, as do we all, he added graciously, gesturing to the sea of guests. Thalia, Derek Proudmore approached with Kalia and Lillian and doffed his hat. It is so good to see you, though I do wish my dear sister had been able to attend. Wrathion could not help his mouth from hanging just the slightest bit open in disbelief as Thalia welcomed all three warmly. Here was Jaina's brother, a Forsaken, who was accepted by his family and former compatriots. Even so, he stayed close to Kalia. In theory, he has enemies on all sides, Wrathion mused. But he also has family, blood or found, on all sides too. Wrathion realized perhaps he was a touch jealous. Wrathion took note of who else was not in attendance. I cannot help but notice that there are no night elves present, he shared airily. His talons had informed him that Tyrande and Malfurion were still smarting after what they viewed as mistreatment at the hands of the Alliance during the war. Wrathion had also learned that the Kaldari were preoccupied with a new development. He did not know the nature of the endeavor yet. What new endeavor do you guys think that could be? Thalia glanced around. I'm sure the Night Elves were invited. I'm sure. Wrathion took a slow sip of his arc wine. I do spy Queen Maya. The Queen had come in her husband's stead, a wise decision, since King Gain Greymane was said to have held on to his hatred of the Horde. Furthermore, the petite, convivial Mia warmed hearts with her mere presence, mixing kindness with a cheerful practicality. She was filling a plate of Sumerian delicacies at a nearby banquet table. So Gain Greymane still hates the fucking Horde. Easy. Easy, boys. This is how the next Horde V Alliance expansion starts. The Forsaken delegation exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was a pleasure to see the Queen again, Kalia said diplomatically. Wrathion watched as Maya struck up a conversation with Illyria Windrunner. She whispered something to the ranger, and Illyria burst into laughter. Wrathion raised an eyebrow. Illyria was always serious, both she and Tyrallion, who was talking with Delungi in front of the towering lavender-frosted wedding cake. Thalyssra had thoughtfully placed it on a small cart, which would be wheeled to various areas so everyone could see it in its unsliced magnificence. Wrathion noted that Tyrallion seemed oddly relaxed in the heart of Horde territory. The Black Dragon averted his gaze, thinking their behavior spoke volumes about the changes the past 5 years had brought. And it dawned on him. His loyal spies, who kept him up to date, had informed him there had been long tension between the two. Wrathion supposed 1,000 years of war could do that to a couple. But it appeared the light-infused paladin and the void-touched elf had rekindled what had been a legendary romance. Wrathion? Kalecgos was regarding him curiously. Are you all right? Never better, Wrathion lied. He lifted his glass to the assemblage and gave a bow. You'll pardon me. I think I see Magni glinting over there. I should say hello. He had indeed seen Magni glinting. He glinted frequently, sometimes blindingly. Fortunately, the soft twilight of Suramar did not create too fierce a glitter. The former Dwarven king had once attempted a ritual, right before Deathwing had erupted from the earth, wreaking destruction and death. To speak with Azeroth itself, it had worked with caveats. While Magni was now the speaker of Azeroth, he had been turned into solid diamond. It did not seem to bother him or his family. Magni, his brothers, and his daughter were roaring with laughter with the young troll Accolonn, who looked at him in admiration. Yeah, just glinting, shine bright. Wrathion spread out his arms as he strode towards them. Magni, he cried, genuinely glad to have spotted him, for the two had worked together to defeat N'Zoth. Ho! Wrathion, come here, laddie, and let me introduce you to me family. Me brothers, Muradin and Bran, and me dear daughter, Moira. I, of course, know all your names, Wrathion said with a dashing wink. It was true. And what a pleasure to finally meet you, he added, taking in the lively bunch. Oh, we know about you too, Moira said. Me da here, willna shut up. Yeah, fucking hell, the Scottish is rough. Wrathion was caught off guard. Such a warm welcome almost undid him. The feeling was contagious. Magni unwittingly came to the rescue. We bronzebeard boys have just returned from exploring Northrend. And who should overhear us talking about young Zakhan here? Zakhan was almost incandescent with delight. I am proud to meet you, Zakhan, but I think there may be another whom I've to meet, Moira. Did the future Emperor accompany you today? Aye, though I had to pull his nose out of a book, she said. I'm glad I did. Look over there. According to reports, through his talents, Dagon II, the child of a bronzebeard princess and a dark iron emperor, was heir presumptive to both thrones. His physical appearance embodied traits of both parents, skin a warm shade of grey with green eyes. Wrathion had been told that one could see the occasional glimmer of a fiery red in them. Dagran's long white hair was pulled back in a tidy braid, and his gawky frame was dressed in elegant formal garb, which he had likely ruined by sitting on the grass beneath a tree. Arator sat beside him, and they chatted amicably as Arator flipped through a large tome, perhaps the one Moira had needed Dagran to put down, and the dwarven boy examined a beautiful ceremonial dagger that Arator had worn to the wedding. Dagran is me heart made flesh again, Magni said softly. And yon Arator's a good lad, a kind one. Growing up, Dagran did not have many friends. Wrathion understood not having many friends, or any friends. He'd never truly been a child. He had grown so swiftly and been driven by so dark a purpose that there had been no time for play. Of course, a childhood disrupted by wars and conflicts didn't help. Meeting Anduin in Pandaria had been both a gift and a curse. A gift because Wrathion had learned that someone, anyone, might deem him worth caring for. A curse because Wrathion had chosen to exploit Anduin's trust in an ill-conceived attempt to protect Azeroth. They had met again years later, and that encounter had been, well, suffice it to say, Anduin had a much better right cross than Wrathion had given him credit for. He hoped they could reconcile once Anduin returned from wherever he was. Wrathion drained his glass, and the strange ache in his chest returned. You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow. Booknote Price, probably turning evil or dying. Things so nice. How you doing? Alright. Would you like to meet him? Moira's question made the Black Dragons start. They seemed content. I think I'll stretch my legs a bit. A pleasure meeting you. Over yonder was a serene pond. He was not sure if it was the Arkwine, the number of guests hemming in around him, or the ache, but he decided he would walk for a bit, then go. I should not have come. Let my spies gather what I need to. To do what? He would never find the Dragonals. He would never be able to make and keep a true friend, inspire troops, or taste the type of joy that Lor'themar and Thalyssra had found, or the bronzebeards. Eyes fixed on the pond, he strode quickly toward it, stopping with a growl when a warm, rumbling voice called out to him, "Ah, Wrathion, there you are!" Wrathion closed his eyes, then turned with a forced smile. Bane, Myla. The traveling cake had reached this area, and as a servant passed by, Wrathion helped himself to another glass of Arkwine. He could use it. I am surprised and pleased to see you chose to attend, Bane said. Yes, well, the guest list called for Azeroth's best and brightest. They laughed. He drank. Myla slipped her arm into Bane's, and the High Chieftain covered it. Wrathion had to fight the impulse to dash his glass to the ground. He had expected the wedding would be, well, a wedding. But it was so much more, and everywhere, this inescapable sense of belonging and love and connection, like some sort of cheerful blight rising to engulf everyone and smother them with cozy contentment. Everyone, of course, except him. Him and that Tauren over there. He was black-furred with white markings on his muzzle. He was not dressed formally, as the invitation had requested, but wore shamanic robes and held a staff, and he was staring directly at them. Ah, your pardon, chieftain, Wrathion said to Bane, keeping his eye on the stranger. But is this sullen-looking fellow a friend of yours? Bane followed his gaze and frowned. Korog? One of Magatha's Grim Totem. He all but spat the words. Bane had every reason for his vehemence. Wrathion had learned through his spies that Magatha Grimtotem had secretly poisoned the weapon that killed Bane's father, Kern, turning a scratch into a death sentence and instigating a coup. Thunderbluff soon returned to Bloodhoof hands, and Bane had shown mercy and merely exiled the Grimtotem. But clearly, bad blood still lingered. Very bad blood. If the expression on the interloper's face was any indication, Kurak strode towards them. This is where it gets interesting now, I'm hoping. Thalyssra and Lor'themar have sullied themselves by inviting dragons, let alone a black dragon, the shaman said, the most unnatural of them all. Why a shaman would know so much about black dragons, Wrathion did not know. Hearing it made his hand holding the cup of Arkwine tremble. But for an instant, metal plating clamping down, forcing magma to retain a form, Wrathion took a stealing breath, reining it in. He would play the part of a future aspect, not a monster. A smile alighted on his face, and he gave a courteous bow, taking note of the many heads starting to turn their way. Was this where the show ended? You should not be here, Bane stated. I have the same right to be here as you, Korak retorted. Wrathion held his tongue. I am a shaman, Korak continued. The entire earth is mine to walk. Oh, I doubt that very much. Wrathion's voice was smooth as glass. The Nightborn have suffered far too much to protect Suramar to let riffraff like you saunter in. Where's your invitation, by the way? Wrathion's was in his pouch, albeit wrinkled from his earlier ire. Who admitted you? No matter, I will very gladly escort you out before anyone else takes notice of you making a silly fool of yourself. Wrathion could hear the onlookers watching quietly. Let them watch. Korak kept going, scrutinizing him. How were you made, Wrathion? Cobbled together out of pieces of corpses? You and your depraved kin? You are the very symbol of all that has gone wrong in this world. While most onlookers murmured in the shock of Korak's words, Wrathion heard a voice from deep in the crowd, cheering the Tauren on. A chill ran through Wrathion, but not from the voice of the saint in the crowd, rather from the peculiarity that a shaman would know this bit of awfully specific information. He wondered if he was the reason the Tauren had decided to show up. Korak gave a leering smile. It was ugly and cruel and filled with glee at Wrathion's discomfiture. You could save Azeroth 1,000 times and still never be a natural part of it. You are an outcast. You will never remove the reek of who you are. A skeleton of iron and not of bones. The rage burning hotter than the fire. There was a snap. Pain blossomed in Wrathion's hand from the broken shard of the arcwine glass he had crushed. He ignored it and lunged forward, seizing the shaman's robe and lifting the enormous Tauren as if he weighed nothing. Yeah, point of fact, maybe don't look for a fight with a dragon. Even in humanoid form, they be strong as fuck. I could incinerate you in half a heartbeat, Wrathion snarled, his voice harsh and deep and unfamiliar. He pressed on, shaking the shaman. With a single sweep of my claws, your lifeblood would flow into the sands of time, stained with the blood of so many. The blasts of magma, my own dragonflight coming for me, and the shadow, always the shadow. Wrathion felt a hand on his arm, and Kalecgos was there. It took every bit of control Wrathion had not to turn on him too. Let him go now, the blue dragon said calmly. Wrathion took great heaving breaths before shoving Korak away. The shaman staggered, crashing into the cart supporting the fount-inspired wedding cake. The cart tipped over before the appalled server could react, and the great, beautiful pillar of a cake toppled to the paved stone. Ooh, that's bad. Korak righted himself with his staff and growled, looking ready to charge. Yeah, the cake's fucked now. Some onlookers shouted in concern for Wrathion, others in support of Korak. Kalecgos sought to place a reassuring hand on Wrathion's shoulder. But this time, the black dragon shrugged him off. Wrathion's red eyes narrowed to angry slits as he prepared to rush the Tauren. Stop! Thalyssra's voice, usually warm and modulated, cracked like a whip. Wrathion froze, along with Korak. What has happened here? The first Arcanist was controlled despite her fury. Her hands were glowing with power so palpable that Wrathion could almost smell it. She surveyed the crowd. Then her ruined wedding cake. Wrathion started to speak. This grim totem, Mela interrupted, her voice as steely as Thalyssra's, has trespassed onto your lands and intruded on your celebration solely to harass your guests. Thalyssra turned to Korak, evaluating the brute. I shall grant you more courtesy than you showed me, Tauren, and allow you to leave on your own 2 feet. Go, before I change my mind. The pulsing magic wreathing her hands had not wavered for an instant. There were 2 types of aggressors Wrathion knew. Those who wilted like a flower before snowfall, and those who, despite all warnings, could not resist a last swipe. Korag was clearly the latter. As he spat at Wrathion's feet, he gazed out at the crowd smugly. Soon you will all know the true power of the Tauren. Then he bowed in mock courtesy at Thalyssra, eyed Bane and Mela with contempt, and turned to depart. Bane and the others looked as puzzled by the Tauren's warning as Wrathion felt. Thalyssra nodded to Silgrin, who wordlessly moved to follow. The spellfencer would ensure that Korag would not get lost on his way out. Wrathion registered that several of the bystanders were glaring at the shaman and offering Wrathion awkward smiles and support. Others smirked at him. Their faces showed poorly concealed loathing. His sharp ears caught the cruel, ugly words that they thought Wrathion could not hear. And another voice, this one in his head. You are my legacy. You shall never escape my shadow. Wrathion straightened, gazing from the cake to his hands. The rage had spent itself. And the other pain, somehow worse than anger, was making itself known again. Heat rose in Wrathion's face, and he silently cursed his lack of control. Composing himself, he spoke. I regret not expressing myself in a more civilized fashion. Doing what he could to recover the dignity he had torn to shreds, Wrathion forced himself to look at Thalyssra and Lor'themar. I am sorry for causing such an incident. There is no need to apologize, Lor'themar said with a twinkle in his eye. The bakers have many more cakes where that came from. We regret that our security was insufficient, Thalyssra added. None of our guests should have been exposed to such vitriol. It's interesting that they made many cakes. They probably knew when you invite the Horde and the Alliance to a party, things could go wrong, the cake could get fucked, so have many cakes. That way, if one gets shit on, you still have another one, and another one, and another one. Pretty clever. They just summoned a mage table. Easy. You're very kind, but I should have realized that my presence here would be provocative to some. I hope this did not tarnish your memories of this most joyful occasion. I must depart, and I wish you both nothing but happiness for all your days. They did not protest. I owe you my thanks, Bane chimed in. Korag is a powerful shaman. Wrathion held up a hand, flashing a charming smile. No need for thanks. The black dragon bowed, straightened his shoulders, and strode off without another word. Wrathion did not know the identities of the towering twin statues in the vineyard. They were Nightborn, holding aloft standards. The standard frames were topped with a carved crescent moon that proved a comfortable surface. And that was all he needed now. He needed to know. He lay cradled in one, his legs crossed at the ankles and hands laced behind his head. He was deeply tired and a bit drunk. Between the dead-end search for the Dragon Isles and the harrowing dream that continually shattered his sleep, his endurance had all been drained. Add the haunting twinge in his chest, wearing him down in his waking hours, and one could start to see why he had taken to consuming so much wine of late. The disaster of the day had done nothing but reinforce every brooding thought he held about himself. So many in the crowd had moved so swiftly to derision. He was quick to anger, and he was not fit to lead. Not when he had threatened Korag with such violence over nothing but words. Even now, Wrathion felt the shadow of Deathwing upon him. Foolish to have hoped for anything else. His dark reverie was broken by a voice calling his name. He ignored it. "Wrathion," the voice called again. Sighing, the black dragon peered down. Like himself, the other dragon was still in his visage, which was as striking as his true form. Kalecgos. "What do you wish of me?" The blue dragon lifted a bottle of arc wine and 2 glasses. "Some help in drinking this fine vintage." Not such a bad idea. The wedding had not been an escape from his mounting uneasiness. More arc wine would perhaps do the trick. Wrathion leaped from his makeshift perch, shifting into his true shape and reassuming his visage after landing. "My company will likely not be pleasant," Wrathion said as he accepted the glass Kaleg offered, recalling the overly optimistic wording of the invitation. "But you are welcome to it." Kaleg looked at him with compassion as they wandered towards a bench and sat. "You are not at fault, Wrathion. You were invited. The Grim Totem was not. He came only to cause trouble, and unfortunately, he succeeded. The Tauren are a great and kind people." He filled Wrathion's glass. "Most of them, at least. There are exceptions to everything, of course. Save for black dragons, it would seem," Wrathion replied. "Hatred of my flight seems fairly unanimous, don't you think? Even I felt it necessary to thin their ranks." He thought of the looks on some of the wedding guests' faces before he'd left. The fear, the disgust, the voice of Deathwing in his mind. Korag was not alone in his revulsion. You played a major role in defeating N'Zoth, and major roles in far less savory events. He took a sip. The wine was sweet and heady. "I wish I hadn't come. I'm sure Lor'themar and Thalyssra would agree." Kaleg mildly took a sip of his own arc wine. "I, for one, think they made it clear they're furious someone trespassed and insulted a few of their honored guests." A humorless smile quirked one corner of Wrathion's mouth. "Perhaps, but if so, it is only because they and you are exceptionally kind and open-minded. The rest, well, we black dragons are cautionary tales." Kaleg pressed his lips together, then sighed. "It can be difficult for others to trust your flight," he said quietly. "I know a bit about how that feels. I also know we will likely never discover if Neltharion embraced the madness of the old gods by choice." Wrathion looked away. He did not want to show how deeply the words resonated. "It's possible he was a victim of their influence, and did not wish for his fate," Kaleg continued, adding after a moment, "just as Kalecgos did not wish for the pain that twisted his own mind and spirit to cruelty." Wrathion rarely flinched. He did not do so now, but he felt the impulse. He had been told that the original aspect of the blue dragonflight had once been warm, humorous, and kind, much, he thought, like Kalecgos. But when nearly all his flight had been slaughtered, the blue aspect's mind had been lost to grief for eons. When he recovered, Kalecgos was so greatly changed that he attempted to exterminate any mortals who dared use magic. In the end, his own kin had no choice but to attack and slay him. As I said, you are kind enough to avoid mentioning that Neltharion's betrayal of his dearest friend was the incident that shattered Kalecgos and cost your flight so dearly. I am told they were indeed close, friends who shared many secrets. Now, sadly, all lost to time. Kaleg poured himself another glass of arc wine. His voice in the next moment was sure and strong. "But you, Wrathion, are not Neltharion. If only I could honestly believe that. But hadn't Neltharion become Deathwing? Who would Wrathion become?" He clinked his glass with Kaleg's. "Nor are you Kalecgos." It was intended to be a compliment. But Wrathion saw Kalec's shoulders slump. The blue dragon laughed sadly. I'm not much of anything anymore. There's barely a blue dragonflight at all now. We should not have disbanded, not when our numbers were so small. Kalec pressed a hand to his chest, then let it fall as he looked out into the night. The aspect has surrendered Titan-granted powers to finally and utterly destroy Deathwing. They were still dragons, of course, but aspects now in name only. The blues, Wrathion knew, had drifted to disconnected places all over the world. Well, Wrathion said lightly, trying to shift the mood, though perhaps the effect of the Arkwine was bringing out this merrier side of him. Aren't we a fine pair? Two brilliant, handsome young dragons with no flights. I suggest that, since neither of us has any community at all to speak of, if our aspects could be friends, then surely we can as well. After all, as the mortals are so fond of pointing out, misery loves company. That got a genuine laugh out of Kalecgos. You helped slay an old god. Perhaps others will stay well clear of us, but I am curious about something. The last time we spoke, you inquired about the Dragon Isles. I'm sorry I could not be of more assistance. Knowledge of them is as cloaked in secrecy for me as it is for you. Have you discovered anything further? Nothing. Wrathion looked to the sky. You were the only one who told me anything of value, that the land's magic had gone dormant a long, long time ago. I wasn't even born then. I can't believe that little scrap of information was all you learned. Who else did you speak with? Wrathion counted on his fingers, asked Chromie if she knew where it was. He said, referring to the bronze dragon. She said yes, then no, and then admitted she was confused. Ysera is gone. He sobered for a heartbeat, thinking of the absence of the green flight aspect, and Nostormu won't even grant me an audience. Nostormu, leader of the Bronze Flight, was preoccupied maintaining all the infinite timeways. And Alexstrasza? Kalec asked, keeping his voice neutral as he brought up the aspect of the Red Flight. The Reds and Wrathion had a rather complicated past, which included trying to kill one another on more than one occasion. He had been so desperate for knowledge that he swallowed his pride and spoken with the Dragon Queen, who was unexpectedly kind. Even so, she had only sighed and said, "It is a place that is lost to us." Nothing of consequence was all Wrathion said. He sounded and felt despondent. He had for some time, and found it increasingly hard to hide the pain from others. Attending the wedding had only deepened the feeling. He found his hand at his chest, pressing as if to physically soothe the ache. Glancing up, he saw that Kalec was doing the same. "Kalec," Wrathion asked slowly, "are you in pain?" Kalec had been lost in thought, then started. "Oh, no. Well," he amended, "not so much a pain as a sorrow. There have been various times in my life when I felt desolate, alone, that there was something I wanted, needed, but couldn't have. I'm experiencing the same sensation," Wrathion said, red eyes narrowing, "as if there is a weight on my chest, a feeling in my bones I can't seem to articulate." "Yes, that's it exactly," exclaimed Kalec. "And also, as if I am missing a piece of myself that I didn't know I had, but now I yearn for it." They looked at each other for a long moment. Wrathion spoke cautiously. "If we are both feeling this sensation, then perhaps other dragons are too?" Kalec breathed. For the first time in a long time, hope flickered within Wrathion, and he was overcome with a desire to meet a certain someone, as if summoned. I hate to humble myself yet again, and I am uncertain if I will find answers, but perhaps we should go to Wormrest and ask Alexstrasza some questions. Wrathion quirked an eyebrow. Let's stop finishing each other's sentences, shall we? Kalecgos laughed, then moved his hands elegantly, opening a portal. A glimpse at its center revealed a cool teal and blue-white landscape. Perfect. I was growing frightfully wary of all this purple, and with that, Wrathion stepped through. It would seem we are not alone in our mysterious melee, Wrathion remarked. That's an understatement, Kalecgos murmured. They had materialized near the base of Wormrest Temple, finding themselves in the center of the largest gathering of dragons Wrathion had ever seen. Some were their visages, and it did not escape Wrathion that many placed their hands on their chests over their hearts from time to time, waiting for the Dragon Queen to address them. Wrathion did not expect to see any of his own flight there, of course. There were plenty of red and bronze dragons, and many greens as well. But he was saddened to spot so few blue dragons in comparison. Kalecgos was right about them being scattered. There's barely a blue dragonflight at all now. Stay here, waiting with the rest of them if you like, Wrathion told Kalecgos. But I refuse to squander a single moment more. The troubling sensation was not abating, but rather increasing. Suiting actions to words, Wrathion shifted and flew directly to the top of the temple. He was done with waiting to find the Dragon Isles, waiting for the dream to stop tormenting him, waiting to understand what this cursed feeling was and why he feared the unknown. And yet, as he recalled the joy he witnessed at the wedding, the warmth of loved ones, the power of connection and belonging, Wrathion was terrified that whatever Alexstrasza had to say, it would not be good, that whatever his heart had been seeking would never be his, even if it had a name. Alexstrasza was in her visage, long red hair, almost the same hue as her cloak, gazing at the mass of dragons gathered below her. With her was Nosdormu. He was often stoic and difficult for even Wrathion to read, which was likely a good thing, considering his powerful knowledge of the past and future. But now he looked pensive, distant even. Beside him stood Ysera's daughter, Marithra, who had stepped up as the informal head of the Green Dragonflight after the loss of her mother. While Marithra had her hand to her heart, she did not look distressed. Her night elven face instead showed peace. Alexstrasza, this feeling, this... Lost for words, Wrathion thumped his chest. What is happening to us? She turned, and her face, as it had been during his last visit, was soft and alight with joy. Straight to the point. You are ever true to form, Wrathion, she said with gentle mirth. Why, thank you. Alexstrasza stepped forward, and as if there was not and never had been mistrust or resentment between them, gently placed a hand on his face. To his own surprise, he allowed it, comprehending that the significance of this moment transcended any quarrels. Young one, the Dragon Queen said, exchanging a sage look with Nosdormu. You have heard the call, and you have answered. Wrathion did not understand. The call? Yes, the call, she said, speaking to all of those standing closely around her. One long awaited. All of us, here, below, anywhere in the world, we have all been called, and we have heard it with our hearts. The Dragon Isles are awaiting our return. But, Wrathion shook his head, still not comprehending. Wrathion, she said softly, you are homesick. The ache, the desperate longing for something he had never had. Homesick? The Dragon Isles had never been denied to him. They were only waiting for him and for every other dragon in Azeroth. His people. Wrathion had not been excluded. He was being welcomed. He belonged. Now that he knew what the hurt in his chest represented, it dissipated, transforming into something close to exaltation. And as the Dragon Queen turned to continue in sharing the jubilant revelation with all those gathered below, Wrathion, the Black Prince, the dragon without a flight, realized his recurring nightmare also had the power to transform. He saw it now not as a forecast of an inevitable fall to darkness, but as a challenge to be accepted and conquered. All of dragonkind was, in this moment, his kin. The dragons gathered below cheered and applauded at the news, as if on cue. Homesick, he mused to himself. But he had a home now, and soon he would have a flight. Wrathion thought of the vows exchanged earlier, pledges of undying devotion and care. And he made one now. It would be he, not Deathwing, who would guide his flight to their future. And that was a promise he would keep. This wasn't bad. I mean, it's a very, let's call it an uneventful short story, but definitely not a bad short story. There's a couple of interesting things in the short story that I think is definitely worth highlighting. For example, at some point they talk about we will perhaps never know whether Deathwing made the decision to follow the old gods or perhaps he had no choice in it. And I think the Legacies chapters sort of gave us that insight. Deathwing absolutely chose the old gods. Albeit in a moment of absolute desperation, still the choice was made. Kurak, of course, very interesting to see him, because Kurak, by the way, is the guy that ultimately frees Razageth. So obviously the Grim Totem is going to have a massive part to play in that story to come. But yeah, all in all, I thought this was really cool. Imagine this short story happening just before the DF cinematic. Yeah, probably. That's probably exactly when this takes place, Thorwald. So the dragons, after Alexstrasza speaks to them, all of the dragons take flight and they fly into the Dragon Isles.